Welcome to Ripple Heart Updates, where stories come alive to touch your soul and remind you of the beauty of love, kindness, and unexpected connections. Today, you're about to hear a story that will take you through the world of wealth, privilege, and the kind of choice that changes everything. The towering glass walls of the Richmond estate shimmered under the warm afternoon sun, casting long reflections over the lush gardens. Inside, the air smelled faintly of roses and freshly polished marble. Charles Richmond, one of the wealthiest men in the country, stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows sipping his expensive aged whiskey. His life had been defined by power, influence, and flawless appearances. But there was one thing he had yet to secure: an heir's mother who could represent the Richmond legacy. His only son, Alexander, had just turned 28. Charles had always believed his son's life should be perfect, meticulously designed for success. He decided it was time for Alexander to choose a wife, but not just any wife. She had to be beautiful, poised, socially connected, a woman who would fit into the billionaire world seamlessly. And so Charles arranged something unusual: a gathering of 10 of the most sought-after models from around the globe. They were flown in, each promised the chance to meet and possibly marry the young heir. Alexander, however, wasn't quite like his father. While he grew up surrounded by opulence, the endless galas, and the polished smiles of the elite, he had always craved something more real. He preferred long walks in the garden over flashy parties and spent more time talking to the staff than mingling with the glamorous guests his father entertained the night before the grand introduction. Alexander had been in the kitchen, unable to sleep. That's when he noticed her for the first time. A young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing a simple uniform and tying her hair into a messy bun. She was humming softly while cleaning the counter, her movements graceful but unpretentious. Her name was Maria. She had been working in the Richmond household for less than a year, always keeping her head down, never drawing attention to herself. Alexander lingered in the doorway longer than he intended, watching her carefully stack the plates. Maria turned, startled to see him, and nearly dropped one. He caught it just in time, and they both laughed at the near mishap. It was a small, genuine laugh, not the polite kind he had grown accustomed to. He found himself asking her questions, and she, though hesitant at first, began to open up. She told him she grew up in a small town, came to the city for work after her father fell ill, and dreamed of finishing her education one day. Something about her honesty stayed with him that night. It was so rare in his world. The next day, the models began arriving. The estate's main hall looked like a scene from a high-fashion runway. Glittering gowns, sparkling jewelry, and the faint scent of expensive perfume filling the air. His father greeted each woman warmly, boasting about Alexander's achievements and wealth, while subtly assessing who would make the best match. When Alexander entered, the room fell silent for a moment. He was handsome, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, but his eyes held a quiet depth that made the models lean in with interest. They smiled, introduced themselves, and the games began: small talk, compliments, light flirtations. His father beamed, imagining how one of these women could become the perfect addition to their family, but Alexander's mind wasn't fully in the room. Every time he looked at the polished faces and heard their rehearsed lines, he thought of Maria's unguarded laugh in the kitchen. She had looked at him not as the billionaire's son, but as a person. The evening wore on, and Charles decided it was time to push things forward. He called his son aside, his voice low but firm. "Alexander, it's time to choose. These women are the best of the best beauty, grace, class. Pick one, and we'll arrange the engagement. The Richmond name must continue with dignity." Alexander stared at his father, then at the room full of hopeful smiles. And then he said, quietly but firmly, I've already chosen, father. Charles' eyebrows shot up. Already chosen? You've barely spoken to them. Yes, Alexander replied, because the woman I want isn't in this room. The models exchanged curious glances, wondering if this was some elaborate test. Charles frowned deeply. What are you talking about? Alexander took a step back, letting the words land with deliberate weight. The woman I want is Maria the maid. For a moment, silence swallowed the hall. Then came the murmur of disbelief, the soft gasp from one of the models, and the tightening of Charles' jaw. You can't be serious, his father said, voice controlled but icy. A maid? Son, do you understand what you're saying? She has no social standing, no pedigree, nothing to offer in the way of status. She has everything I need, Alexander said, his voice unwavering. Kindness, honesty, a heart that's real. Charles stared at him, the tension palpable. Do you think love is enough in our world? This isn't some fairy tale. Maybe not in yours, Alexander replied, but it will be in mine. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the hall. The models, confused and disappointed, began whispering among themselves. Charles stood frozen, grappling with the idea that his son had just rejected every expectation he had carefully built. Alexander found Maria in the garden, tending to the flowers. She looked up, startled to see him still in his formal suit. Is the event over already? She asked. He smiled. For me, it is. Maria, I told my father I want you. Not because you're the safe choice or the expected one, but because you're the only choice that feels right. She shook her head, confused. Alexander, I'm just a maid. I don't belong in your world. Then I'll make my world. Belong to you, he said softly. I don't care about the titles, the fancy parties, or the expectations. I care about you. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined a man like him could see her for who she truly was. But she also feared the storm this choice would bring. Your father will never accept me. Then I'll spend my life proving he was wrong. In the weeks that followed, Charles tried every tactic to change his son's mind, introducing him to more suitable women, offering to fund entire ventures if he agreed to marry one of them, but Alexander never wavered. He spent more time with Maria, learning about her world, her struggles, and her dreams. They took walks in the park, cooked meals together in the kitchen, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Slowly, Charles began to notice something. His son seemed happier than ever, not the forced smiles he wore at social events, but genuine laughter, an ease in his posture, a light in his eyes. One evening, Charles found them in the garden, Maria reading aloud from a worn book while Alexander listened intently, his hand resting gently over hers. There was a peace in that moment that Charles had never seen in his own marriage. It made him remember his younger days, before wealth hardened him, when love wasn't a calculated move but an unguarded leap. Months later, when Alexander announced his engagement to Maria, Charles didn't object. He still had reservations, but deep down, he knew his son's happiness mattered more than appearances. The wedding was small but beautiful, held in the very garden where they first spoke. Maria wore a simple dress, Alexander a classic suit, and as they exchanged vows, Charles found himself unexpectedly moved. In the end, the billionaire's son had chosen not the glamorous, the expected, or the strategic, but the one woman who had touched his heart in the simplest of ways. And perhaps Charles thought that was the richest choice of all.